Crossroads Missions Director Tim Adams and his wife Katie started Nika Works in 2008. The ministry was created to provide real hope and growth in Nicaragua, the second poorest country in the Western Hemisphere. As a Crossroads affiliate, the church supports the ministry with sustained monthly giving, visiting teams, and ongoing leadership. Josh Jensky, Nika Works Field Director, explains the ministry's impact.
This is Nicaragua, and God has placed us here to do ministry, and we love it. We love the fact that we could be part of this transformation right now in this time, and to see how God moves in people's lives in the places that you least expect it. It's not easy, but Nika Works is going to rough places, hard places, to share the gospel, and just to be part of that is really exciting.
Crossroads leadership was key in helping the ministry navigate an unexpected crisis last April. In a country where a majority of people struggle to find day labor, the government announced massive new taxes. The country exploded overnight. Tens of thousands of people took to the street. Government forces responded quickly and violently, with metal pipes, tear gas, and eventually bullets. The unexpected violence escalated for weeks and then months. Nika Works leadership quickly realized that it needed to change its ministry focus to keep its staff safe, employed, and able to respond to the crisis. The Nika Works board, which is comprised primarily of Crossroads members, was on the phone around the clock, working with Josh to redirect all ministry activities and move workers. In less than 10 days, the ministry was able to completely shift focus to agriculture production. The staff was moved to safe shelter and put under the direction of Junior Laguna, the ministry's lead agronomist. God had been preparing Junior for this new role for 16 years, ever since Tim and Katie first met him. He trained extensively in agricultural production and oversaw a farm in his community of Veracruz. Since coming on staff with Nika Works, he has traveled around the country wherever he's asked, teaching pastors and lay people how to best start and maintain small-scale farms. In the last 11 months, Junior took a large piece of land and created the ministry's first model farm. He trained virtually all of the ministry's staff in agriculture production, so they can now train others, including pastors. He's led production of multiple crops, donating food to Nika Works partners, including orphanages that were running low on food as a result of the crisis, as well as selling crops to generate new revenue for the ministry. Most exciting, God has blessed Junior and the ministry with 2 additional new model farm sites. With Crossroads support, Nika Works has been able to keep all of its staff safe, employed, and creating new ministry to meet the needs of local people.
Well, it's not a great video, but I have a question. Why should you care? I know that might sound kind of harsh. Maybe that's kind of a harsh thing to ask. But honestly, I'm asking you honestly, why should you care? When you watch a video like that, it's nice and that's good and I'm glad, but at the end of the day, you might ask yourself, and maybe understandably, they're thousands of miles away in a different country. I'm probably never going to meet those people. Why should I really care about that at the end of the day? Well, I think there's a great answer to that question, and we're going to answer it today as we start this series that we've entitled, Let's Go. And now that's a popular phrase, let's go. You probably hear it all the time. You might hear it in my car. If someone cuts me off or is too slow in traffic, I might say, let's go, beep, beep. Not like I ever do that, right? I am a total saint behind the wheel. But also whenever I've got my kids, I'm trying to get them outside, I'm like, hey, come on, kids, get in the car, let's go, let's go. Mom's in the room, you know what I'm talking about? You ever say that as you're trying to get your kids out? But then my favorite way to use this phrase is when you use let's go like a rally cry. Like you're about to get out on the field or you're about to get out on the court or you make a big shot and you're like, let's go, and there's this kind of excitement that comes around it. Now, for us here at Crossroads, we want this series, Let's Go, to be like that. We want it to be like a rally cry for all of us as a church. And we're calling it Let's Go because we're going somewhere together. We're going outside of the walls of this church into the community around us to love and to care for people. And this is a big part of who we are as a church, and it's a big part of this series, and it's this idea of taking our faith and then actually putting it into action in the lives of people around us. Now, faith into action, that's not a Crossroads idea. That's like a Jesus idea. That's a Bible idea, right? And this is James 2:14, and James was the brother of Jesus, an early leader in the church, and he spells this out really clearly for us in James 2:14. He says, "What good is it, my brothers and sisters, if someone claims to have faith but then has no deeds? Can such faith save them? Suppose a brother or sister is without clothes and daily food. If one says to them, 'Go in peace, keep warm and well fed,' but then does nothing about their physical needs, what good is it? In the same way, faith by itself, if it's not accompanied by action, is dead." So there's no true faith that doesn't produce action in our lives. The two are connected, faith and action. And this series is all about that. And so as we explore this theme and this idea, we're going to unpack probably what might be one of the most amazing let's go rally cries in all of history. And you can find that in the book of Nehemiah. We're going to walk through some of the book of Nehemiah in this series. Now, let me give you a little background to the book of Nehemiah, so you might not be familiar with it. The book was written in 445 BC. And so that means chronologically, the book of Nehemiah is actually towards the very end of the Old Testament. It's one of the last books chronologically. And it's written right before this 400-year period of silence, right before Jesus comes back into the scene. And during this time, the nation of Israel is actually divided, and they're under attack. And different kingdoms are coming against them relentlessly. And this was a time where it was like everyone wanted power and control. Everyone wanted to be on the throne. And Israel was like a prime target right in the middle of this. It's like the Game of Thrones or something. It was this never-ending, shifting power balance, people that wanted control. But then this story turns when this nation, the nation of Babylon, actually comes in and takes over the city. And they were ruthless. And they had this whole idea of instead of just kind of coming and taking the city captive, they actually wanted to exile the entire city. And so as they came in and they took control of the city, they forced everyone that was there to leave, and all they could take was just what they could carry on their backs. And so there's this idea that, they had to leave, and they were going to Babylon, and they were there for about 100 years. And you could think, this is fast forward 100 years, they've been in Babylon that long, and they actually started to get kind of comfortable there. They actually started to kind of say, well, actually, Babylon's not that bad. And in the political climate had changed, and Babylon actually allowed them to go back to Jerusalem if they wanted to do that. But many of them decided they didn't want to go. They were happy in Babylon. They weren't going to leave. So that's the big picture. That's the background of the story in Nehemiah. But I want to zoom in on one person. I want to zoom in on Nehemiah. Nehemiah was part of God's people, and he was living in the heart of Babylon, and in fact, he was a cupbearer for the king. So that means that every single day, he would come to the king with this like bedazzled, bejeweled wine goblet. He would test the wine and make sure, and if he didn't die, then he would give it to the king, right? Now, this is kind of an important job. This wasn't just like being a server. This guy had to be highly trusted, right? And he was right in the inner circle of the highest levels of power in Babylon. And so when you think cupbearer, I want you to think more like chief of staff and less just a servant for the king. And so my man Nehemiah was into the finer things in life. You can imagine, right? He's like living in the lap of luxury here. He has nice clothes. The job comes with a 401k. He's got stock options going on, right? Things were pretty good for Nehemiah in Babylon. Maybe they were actually too good. You can imagine he probably started to get a little bit comfortable as he was there. But one day, Nehemiah decides that he's going to check on how things are going back with his people in Jerusalem. And so he asks his brother to go and take the trip. It's a long trip. And as he does that, Nehemiah, the book of Nehemiah, is a book written by Nehemiah. It's a memoir, and it begins with this scene as his brother comes back with a report of what's been going on in the city of Jerusalem. And as he gets this news that starts the book off in the first chapter of Nehemiah, it changes Nehemiah's life. And so I'm going to read this passage, and then I'm going to break it down for you. This is Nehemiah 1, chapter 1, verse 1. The words of Nehemiah, son of Hekeliah. Great names, aren't they? The month of Kislev in the 12th year, while I was in the citadel of Susa, Hanani, one of my brothers, came from Judah with some other men and questioned them about the Jewish remnant that had survived the exile, and also about Jerusalem. In other words, how's Jerusalem doing? And they said to me, those who have survived the exile and back and are in the province are in great trouble and disgrace. The wall of Jerusalem is broken down, and the gates have been burned with fire. When I heard these things, I sat down and I wept. And for some days I mourned and fasted and prayed before the God of heaven. So Nehemiah gets this report, and things are bad. And he gets this message that the walls have been broken down. Now, maybe you hear that and you think, what's the big deal, the walls? Who cares that much about the walls? Why is that such a big deal? Well, the walls in Jerusalem were a big deal, right? Because in that time, every city would have this kind of fortified wall, this thick wall around it that would keep the people safe. And that wall was super important for them. It meant an identity. It meant that the people could be alive. It kept crops safe, and it kept the dreams of the city alive and the hopes of the city alive. But there weren't walls in Jerusalem, so that meant the exact opposite. These people were living in constant fear of enemies around them. They would have crops, and then someone would come in and raise their crops and steal their food. And every time they would start to build a life in the city, someone would come and attack them and take it from them. And these walls sat there, and they were in shambles. Not for a year, not for 5 years, not for 10 years. These walls sat there for more than 100 years. Now, spoiler alert here, okay? If you don't know how the story ends in Nehemiah, I'm going to just go ahead and tell you. Nehemiah goes ahead and he actually goes and builds the wall. It only takes him 52 days once he actually gets started. And so I think to myself, there's this part of me when I know that and I hear that, I think, why would they have let the wall sit there for so long? All these people had gone back to the city. Why did they let it sit there for more than 100 years? Well, a couple things. I think the first one, it got to the point where it had been there so long, it may have been overlooked. Like, imagine living in the city of Jerusalem at the time. There were just rocks and bricks and rubble and this wall that had been kind of crumbling all around them. It had been there for so long, it was just what you got used to. You would go to the grocery store, you'd have to step over the rocks, you'd have to maneuver. Your kids were going to school, they'd have to maneuver through the rocks. You would kind of say, hey, watch your toe, try not to step on one of the bricks or whatever. And I just wonder if maybe they had sat around for so long that they stopped seeing the brokenness that was just all around them. They stopped seeing it. It's like they just walked past it so many times, they just didn't even see it was there anymore. Do you guys, some of you might have like a spot on your carpet somewhere, and it really bothered you when it first happened, but now it's been so long, you don't even notice that it's there anymore, or like a mess, it's been there for so long, it used to really bother you. You don't even see it anymore. It was kind of like that. Or maybe it wasn't that. Maybe it wasn't that it was overlooked. Maybe it was just that it was overwhelming for them. Maybe they were looking at this problem and they thought it was just too big of a job. The scale was too big. It just felt like it was a crushing thing that they were going to try to do. And I just wonder if maybe they sat around so long that they couldn't figure out, that they couldn't reimagine a way out of the brokenness. It was just too big for them. Have you ever gotten to the point where you have a need around you that's just so big that it overwhelms you? I remember for me, that happened to me. I went to Haiti. The first time I went to Haiti, I was going with the missions team, but I couldn't join them right away. I had to go a few days later. I had to preach a message on Sunday, and I was going on Monday, and I was going with another friend of mine. We were going to go down, and hours before I was supposed to go to Haiti, he called me and said, man, I can't make it. You're going to have to fly down to Haiti by yourself. And I got this kind of instruction of what to expect as I got off the plane and I walked out the airport in Port-au-Prince. But nothing could have prepared me. I remember walking out of the airport in Port-au-Prince, and I was just kind of bombarded by these people that were desperate for help. They were asking for help. There was 20, 30 people that were pulling on me and saying, hey, will you help me? We need help. Can you do anything? Can you give us some money? Can you help us with something? And I was just, all I could do was walk through the crowd and look to the door that was on the other side of the airport, hoping and praying that the person that was there to pick me up was going to be there. And whenever I got into the truck and I started to drive around the city of Port-au-Prince, and I saw the faces around me and the poverty around me and the hopelessness around me and the lack of infrastructure around me and the broken roads and the homelessness, and I just got to the point as I was driving, it was so overwhelming I couldn't even really process it anymore. I think that actually happens to us a lot. Maybe not in the same way as that. It doesn't feel quite like that, but it happens. Like, we look around at all the need around us, and we think, What can I do here with that, right? Like we look at the hundreds of people dying from overdoses and we think, what can I do? We look at the poverty around us and we think, what can I do about that? We look at the fatherlessness around us. We think, what can I do? And sometimes it's not that the problems are overlooked. It's just that the problems are so big they feel overwhelming. And sometimes it's not either of those things. Sometimes we see the problems, but we just feel like they're not ours. Someone else should deal with these problems. I love my hometown, the city of Pittsburgh, but it has, I promise you, the worst roads in the entire country. I mean, it's just potholes all the time. I mean, I would drive and I would constantly hit potholes. I'd have to get my car aligned all the time. And I'd hit a pothole and I'd be like, whose job is this? Would someone please fix this? It wasn't my problem. And I knew that, but I saw the problem, but I wish someone else would fix it. And I wonder if that was maybe a little bit what it was like in Jerusalem at the time. They just walked by, they'd stepped over, they had maneuvered through the rubble for so long, and every time they walked past it, they would just say, I wish someone would do something about this. I wish someone would fix this thing. This is terrible. And all the while, their city was falling apart right around them. So I have this question I have to ask you. Have you ever walked past, drove past, or read past a problem that was just right in front of you? Maybe you've seen the problem for so long that you don't even notice it anymore. You just kind of overlook it. Or maybe there's a problem, but it feels overwhelming. Or maybe you see this problem around you and you think to yourself, you know what? I hope someone else takes care of that. This isn't my deal. And I think there's probably something like this in all of our lives that's exactly like this broken wall was in Jerusalem. It's been there for so long that we don't even notice it anymore. We step over it. We don't even think about it anymore. It's interesting. Cornell University not long ago did a study. They asked thousands of 60 and 70-year-olds one single, simple, but really powerful question. They said, what do you regret most in your life? And they expected that the answer would be, I wish that I wish I hadn't done this, right? I wish that I hadn't made this mistake in my life. But what they actually said is they pulled these people and they asked this question is, I wish I had done this, and I didn't actually do it. And so what I'm saying is that we regret inaction in our lives more than we regret wrong action. And so many of us, we go through our lives kind of with this inaction, and we kind of go with this mindset of like, shoulda, coulda, woulda, I kind of wish that I had done that. But Nehemiah didn't live that way. He saw a need, and he stepped into it. And I think that as we look at what Nehemiah did, and I want to unpack what he did right now for just a few minutes, is it wasn't descriptive, it was actually prescriptive. That all of us, this is a model for us as we look at the problems in our lives and the issues around us. And I see Nehemiah did three things as we look at this. The first one is he identified a problem. The second thing that he did was he identified with the problem. And then lastly, he identified a step. He took a step. So we're going to identify the problem, identify with it, and then take a step. It's simple, but it's powerful. And so let's look at the first one. What did Nehemiah do? He identified the problem. Scene 1, Act 1 of the book is Nehemiah clearly getting the problem. Jerusalem is in trouble. The wall is broken down. And what are we going to do about it? It's pretty clear that that's a clear definition of the problem. And what I'm saying to all of us here today, that we all need to be able to name what is broken in our communities. That's step one. We need to be able to name what's going on and what's broken in our communities. We all get comfortable living in our own zones. And sometimes we just don't want to be confronted by the issues that are coming around us. We're thinking, hey, I got enough problems on my own. I don't need someone else's problems. But guess what? If we don't know what's broken in our communities and then go and be willing to do something about it, we forfeit credibility with those that see our inaction and know that we should know better, right? And so for all of us, we're not going to change Westminster because people know that we're right about something. We're going to change Westminster because we care about the people in our community. And so for us to do that, we need to get out of the walls of this church, and we need to be able to name what's broken right here in our own neighborhoods. That's what Nehemiah did. He could have stayed kind of, in the king's palace. Things were good. He felt pretty comfortable there. But he had this attitude. He had this heart. He said, I want to know what's going outside, what's going on outside of these walls. And we need to have that same attitude here in the church. What's going on outside of these walls in the church? And at Crossroads, what happens outside of the walls of the church, we call that missions. And we want to do things inside of the walls of the church. We talk about that. We want to increase seating capacity. That's great. But we also want to do at Crossroads things outside of the walls of the church. We want to increase our serving capacity. And all of our missions efforts, and you heard about one already in that video, start with us identifying a problem, looking outside of these four walls and seeing what's going on around us, and then finding a need that we know needs to be addressed and can't be ignored anymore. And so I want to just kind of pause for a second and just give you an overview of some of our missions efforts here at Crossroads. And I just want to say, as I do this, and just give you a picture that each of these has identified a problem that's happening right here in our backyard. And so for us at Crossroads, outside of the walls, missions happens in three different ways. The first one is missions partnerships. And what a partnership is an organization that's already out there doing great work in the community at large. We believe in what they're doing. We believe God is moving in their ministries. And we just want to come alongside and support them and encourage them financially or whatever way we can. And so we have partnerships locally. That's Young Life and FCA, for example. And they've identified this need for the next generation to know who Jesus is. Or the Helping Up mission, where people in Baltimore are struggling with addiction, or NESAP in Hampstead as they're addressing poverty there, or New Beginnings in Warren, West Virginia, right in the heart of one of the most poverty-stricken counties in the country. And then internationally, we have partners as well, churches in Ghana and Guatemala, and places that desperately need to hear about Jesus. And so that's missions partnerships, that's one. But then the second thing that we do is what we call community outreach. And so we identify needs in our community and then do something Saturday. We catalyze the church to go out and meet those needs and be the hands and feet of Christ. And every month we just create an easy way for you to serve in our Do Something Saturday. We have the cold weather shelter where all throughout the winter months we have multiple nights where Crossroads folks are the sole volunteers that go and staff that provides a spot for people that just need a place to stay when it's cold outside. And so that's kind of our community outreach. But then the third one that I want to look at here is affiliate ministries. And these are a little bit more unique to Crossroads, and so I want to explain what these are. These are affiliate ministries are birthed out of Crossroads to address a need in our community or at large that's just not being addressed, right? And so oftentimes they grow into separate organizations. They're an extension of the Crossroads family. They're a vital part of our missions strategy, but they're separate organizations. They've got separate boards. They've got separate directors. They've got separate budgets. And there's four of these that are functioning right now. The first one's NicaWorks. You saw that video right there. We have a board that's mostly Crossroads people that leads NicaWorks. That's an affiliate. We also have Crossroads Counseling Center, another affiliate ministry. Crossroads Community Center right in the middle of Westminster. They've identified this need for after-school programs for kids in that community. Crossroads Recovery Ministry is another affiliate, and that includes like the Men of Standard, which is a 6-month intensive drug rehab program. It's amazing what God's doing in that program. And then we've identified another need, and that is the need for a transition house for folks that have graduated from recovery programs around in the area. We've been praying about this for a long time, and there's a lot of people that want to take another step in their recovery, but they want to stay connected to discipleship and relationship and to one of our campuses and mentoring and all that stuff, and as they take that step and get on-the-job training. And we are so close right now, we're so excited about opening a transition house on 35 Main Street in Westminster. And we're calling it Justin's Place. Someone's excited about that. It's called Justin's Place. There's a story behind that. I'm sure you'll hear at some point. But it was made possible by the gift of a foundation, and it was given straight to Crossroads Recovery Ministry. We're going to have as many as 15 guys living right there in the middle of Main Street as they continue the recovery. And Tim Adams and his team give leadership to all of that. And so each of those missions that I just described right there, I identified a need and then took a step towards that need. But I want to ask the same question that I started this message with. I named out all of those missions, and maybe there's this moment where you think, well, that's really nice. I'm so glad that the church is doing all of that. But why should I care? Really, at the end of the day, I might not ever meet these people. Why should I care? And the answer is it starts with what happens before you take action. It's the action before the action. It's what God does in our hearts. That's why you should care. And so we have to move from simply identifying the problem, and we have to take a step to start to identify with the problems in our area. Identify with the problem. That's the second step. And there's this difference between identifying a problem and identifying with it, right? I mean, it's easy to identify problems. You read the newspaper, you're going to find some problems in the newspaper, right? You're going to walk down the street, you're going to see some things. But do those problems, do those issues, do they move you in your heart? We have to have both to be moved into action. See, we see Nehemiah live this out. He identified this problem, but he didn't stay there. He heard this bad news. It broke his heart, and he wept, and something happened in his heart. And so Nehemiah had never even seen this wall. But he heard the news, and he thought to himself, how can you not be moved by this? People had stepped over it and walked past it for all this time, but then Nehemiah was moved into action. And so Nehemiah, the broken wall, broke his heart. You can hear the passion. He shed tears whenever he heard this. And I have to ask you this question. When was the last time that you cried? Was it a movie? Was it a wedding that was really touching? Was it a Taylor Swift song? I don't know. When was the last time you cried? You know, I have 2 young kids, and so whenever you got young kids, you know, kids tend to cry a little more than adults. And just recently, my son, about a year ago, we had a pet hermit crab, which was probably a mistake. His name was Hermie, and Hermie happened to pass away about a year ago. And Declan, I said, I'm going to do a funeral for Hermie. And so I got my kids in the living room, and I said, you know, we gather together to honor the life of Hermie, Declan's hermit crab. And I thought maybe they would think this was a little bit silly. No, Declan was beside himself. He was just bawling and weeping and crying over Hermie's passing. Listen, kids, they cry all the time, but adults, sometimes it takes more for us to cry than hermit crabs. So when was the last time that you cried, that you really cried? Have you ever had a moment like this that Nehemiah had, where something out there breaks your heart in here? Like, what do you really care about the most? Because for all of us to get to the point of action, we have to get to the point where the discomfort that's on the inside in our hearts is actually greater than the comfort in the culture around us. Nehemiah had a comfortable life, but it got so uncomfortable when God moved in his heart, he had to move into action. And we live in a culture that is comfortable, right? I mean, we all like comfort. We like Netflix, show me what I want. We like Uber, take me where I want, right? We like Google, tell me what I want. That's the culture that we live in. And this message flies in the face of that culture. And so what do you actually care about? What do you really care about? I think for a lot of us, you would say, honestly, the thing I got most upset about this week was like slow Wi-Fi. You know, like really, I mean, and I'm putting myself in that boat. I think so often it's like we get more upset about things like that than the real issues that are happening right outside of these walls. And so as you look around, what has moved from your head to your heart? Where is God speaking to you? Because it starts in our hearts. It starts in our broken, dislocated, disturbed, disrupted hearts. That's where God moves. And that leads me to the last step, and I want to land here. Once you identify the problem, after you identify with the problem, then you have to actually identify what step you're going to take. We're calling this series Let's Go because we want to go somewhere together. And Nehemiah models this as well. In Nehemiah 2, we see that it moved from his head to his heart and out to his hands. Nehemiah 2, starting in verse 1, says this: In the month of Nisan, in the 20th year of King Artaxerxes, when wine was brought for him, I took the wine and gave it to the king. I had not been sad in his presence before. So the king asked me, why does your face look so sad when you are not ill? This can be nothing but sadness of heart. And I was very much afraid. You ever felt like this right before a big moment in your life? But he said to the king, may the king live forever. Why should my face not look sad? When the city where my ancestors are buried lies in ruins and its gates have been destroyed by fire. And the king said to me, what is it that you want? And I prayed to the God of heaven, and I answered the king, if it pleases the king and if your servant has found favor in his sight, let him send me to the city of Judah, where my ancestors are buried, so I can rebuild it. Nehemiah could have heard the news of the wall and just stopped and said, wow, that's too bad for them. Kind of feel bad. But he didn't stop there. He knew that faith without works is dead. Like if our faith doesn't change anything in our lives, what's the point of it? And I love seeing people get this at Crossroads. That's one of my favorite parts of my job, is like seeing people actually catch the vision and then stepping out and living it out. And just like Nehemiah, the people that catch the vision at Crossroads come from all walks of life. I mean, Nehemiah could have pulled the card, time out. I'm not actually like a wall builder by trade. I'm a wine pourer. That's what I do. I do the wine pouring at parties. That's not my main skill. No, but he didn't let his career stop him from his calling. And we see that at Crossroads. We see lawyers and doctors and teachers and IT guys and baristas and electricians and CEOs and you name it. And they're all stepping in to mission. Nehemiah wasn't a prophet, a priest, a pastor. He was just a guy who said yes. And so let me ask you, are you willing to say yes today? For some of you, that might mean stepping into the blitz. For some of you, you heard one of those missions that I talked about, and you're excited about that. For some of you, you know that there's something that you've stepped over for a long time, navigated through for a long time, overlooked for a long time, and maybe God is birthing something in your heart, even right here in this moment. And I have just two pieces of advice as we go really quickly. And the first one is this. I just encourage you to pray. That's the first thing Nehemiah did, is he prayed. You can't pray and then never act, but you can't act without praying, right? You need to have both. And so my encouragement for you is that you would pray that God would stir you. And then my last word is this. Don't miss the supernatural because you're stuck looking for the spectacular. Don't miss the supernatural that's happening right here in our midst because you're stuck looking for the spectacular. Like, notice as we read through Nehemiah, there's no miracles that happen in these pages. There's nothing spectacular, really. Nothing crazy that happens. But there is something, I think, supernatural that happens. And sometimes the most supernatural thing that can happen is what happens in our hearts. It's what happens in your heart and what happens in my heart. And to me, that is the miracle of these pages. It's what God does in the hearts of these people. And that's my prayer for us, that he would move in our hearts through this series. And my prayer for you, and I hope your prayer this week, is this, that God, would you break my heart for what breaks yours? Would you break my heart for what breaks yours? Let me pray and send us out here in a second. Lord, we just thank you for this group of people and the way that you're moving in our church, Lord. Lord, we're just humbled that you would use people like us, Lord, people from all different backgrounds. And I just pray that we wouldn't step over the mess, that we wouldn't step over the problem, that we wouldn't ignore the problem, that we wouldn't be overwhelmed by the problem, but Lord, that we would step into the mess, the darkness, the uncertainty, Lord, and that in that we would find you and that we would find your love and that we would reflect your love to the community around us and that we would get beyond these walls and we would love the people right here in our backyard in Westminster. Lord, we just pray that you would break our hearts right now for what breaks yours. We just pray that that would be a miracle in this place. In Jesus' name, amen. Amen. Would you guys stand as we get ready to